Evening guys, how you guys doing? This is Tuesday night, 5th of May, level 4, and episode, next one. Been having a really good time doing these episodes and just enjoying sharing some knowledge and interacting with you guys and some other people who have had some really good feedback. Had some good questions, that's what tonight's about. We were hoping to do Tina Smith's second episode tonight on loudness, but unfortunately he's lives out in Rustenburg somewhere, so signal's been an issue, so he's asked us to reschedule so we can get that sorted, but we will do that episode on loudness. So just keep watching our page and we'll let you know when that happens. So as advertised tonight, I'm going to be doing a little bit of virtual soundcheck discussions. This is part 1. Part 2 will be a daytime session that we've planned for Friday, which will be on a console at my office, which obviously I can't just drag around to the house here. And I've got some material there that we'll use to demonstrate some practically virtual soundcheck in that format. But I thought before I do that, it is very important to define what virtual soundcheck is and how it fits into the modern day workflow. And we say modern day workflow because in the modern day workflows, virtual soundcheck has become something that is almost easy to do, and because of its ease of use, it's also had some negative effect on guys that get caught extremely unaware and can really throw your entire experience of an event completely upside down. So I wanted to cover some basics on what virtual soundcheck is as a sense, and the fact that we say virtual soundcheck pretty much just implies that we're not using the band on stage. We are utilizing a recording of that band in situ for the purposes of rehearsals or sound checks, so that when the band comes back, we can interact with them without having to go through the detail and waste their time. Not that I'm saying we waste their time. A lot of band members are really keen on making sure that the sound guy gets everything he needs and has a good experience, because obviously if we get what we need, we help them and then they look better at what they're doing. So from a virtual soundcheck perspective, incorporating it into your live event, pretty much all you need is a console with all the channels on it, a way of interfacing with and a DAW, like a digital audio workstation, recording it in real time, so having reliable drive space and all that kind of stuff, and then being able to switch back and play that back into the console when the band leaves stage. One of the key aspects within this scenario is the continuity, and I think this is when people get stuck with this process, and I've said this often, anybody with a laptop these days can hit and record on a live event, and that's great because you can archive your work and you can do a lot of rehearsals and work like that. But if you want to get into a virtual soundcheck scenario that actually carries some weight, in other words, be able to run a virtual soundcheck productively so that when the band comes back, you're on a better footing than when they left, without them knowing the negative aspect. So what affects a band? If you're running a monitor console and a front of house console, band goes on lunch, you stay at front of house, you switch over to your virtual soundcheck system, and I'll talk through a couple of practicals and technicals on different platforms. When band comes back, the idea is that they come back, they get in and they go, oh, this feels awesome. You've sat there for an hour while they're on lunch, and they come back and you just get goosebumps because, man, that was an hour well spent. Where I've seen and I've heard and I've watched people fold where they spend that hour, the band comes back, and it's a start from scratch. And it's not a start from scratch at front of house, it's a start from scratch on stage. And what would cause that? If you're doing in the modern day system, for example, if we utilize a VI system, VI 3000s, where you can split off the input system. In other words, you take the main out to monitor land or front of house, or in this case front of house, and you take the auxiliary split to monitor land, and you do your virtual sound check. You can in most cases, the monitor LAN carries the preamp, so that he can have access to the output on the rack, and front of house can feed the PA off of his console. So using trims at front of house. The minute you do that recording and you utilize song 1, song 2, song 3, what has happened during your process of your sound check while the band was there, the monitor guy's settling in and he's adjusting gains, maybe some fine tuning on mics here and there, and then you go back and utilizing that playback material, just adjust trims, EQs, all that kind of stuff. Band comes back and you recall a scene, but you've trimmed up something or you've trimmed down something, and what happened between that piece that was recorded and the time that you played back, the whole situation has changed. Your preamp, your chain has changed. So the capturing portion of a virtual sound check is more important than your mixing aspect, if that's what you're planning for. So what I mean by that is mic placement, crew's awareness of that, but all engineers involved understanding that we're going to be doing virtual sound check. So we don't mess with gains. Before we hit record, our gains have settled. So we do our tech checks, we do a sound check with all the artists for 20 minutes, and our primary focus is capturing stage. So we're making sure of mic positions, we're making sure of gain structure, and we fine-tuning that. And once we're happy with it, crew takes pictures, takes note, marks, and make sure that everybody understands on the drum kit, whether it's the organ, whether it's a piano mic, any acoustic microphone position, DI, pad switches, all that kind of stuff is marked down. Once that's done, you can safely hit record, and then all engineers leave the preamps alone. You're adjusting trims and you're carrying on like that, but you're not adjusting preamp gains. Then when you do a virtual sound check, your playback material, gain structure that you're getting back from your DAW, remember when you're sending direct outs to your DAW or a MIDI split, your MADI split, your DAW, that signal that you then come back into the console on a VI, you can make it your flip input, your second input. You just hit the flip switch, gang, flip, there's your playback. If your preamp was feeding that directly and now it's coming back in, it's coming back in at the same point at the top of your channel, so without the preamp, but that is the level your preamp was giving you. You can very effectively do a very accurate reenactment of what the band was doing and do everything down from that stage. But you can't mess with the gain structure. If the monitor guy was doing a virtual sound check as well, which he can do, but he has the gain control and he finds that the snare is either clipping or too soft, trim would be your first port of call. You're trimming at the point where the signal comes back in. You're not messing with the head amp, because if he touches the head amp and you both did independent virtual sound checks, when both of you come back to real source, there's going to be a difference because your gain stage has changed. Or if you're traveling from venue to venue to venue like some bands do, this is where your crew comes in, continuity of mic decisions, mic placements, all that, pictures, notes, because if you want to use a virtual sound check when you go from one venue to the next, which is where it becomes really valuable if you're touring with a band, you don't necessarily have the time with the band, because you might be pulling into a venue at 10, doors open at 5, you've got to set up the entire PA, do everything, check, tune, all that. If you had a virtual sound check session, you can spend half an hour, just skip through your songs, everything, it's all there, happy. And then check with the band, make sure you've done your tech checks and your line checks and your gain structures there. Chances are quite close that you'll have a very accurate result. Obviously, every venue is different. So, if you go from a big venue to a small venue, your challenge is not necessarily the technical part, it's the ambient part. There's the acoustics, the noise in the room. There's so many other different elements that come into play. So you need to consider all these kind of things. So if you understand how that works, you can run it very effectively, but it has to be a part of your planning. It has to be part of your workflow that we will be utilizing virtual sound checks. And this is something I'll bring up on Thursday again with Simon when we do part 2. So I just had a question here from Glenn. What's the difference between trim and gain? So when we refer to gain is your preamp gain that's coming into the console, And almost all digital consoles now give you a trim option. So once you've established a gain level, say for example, we are recording the process. So we want to have proper preamp gains going into our DAW. So we gain the channel optimized wise. So we get HIG 18 full scale or 0 dB dBu on our VU meters. But in a small venue, if we're doing a club gig, that's way too high a gain for the venue. So we can trim back on the signal post gain for our working level within the console, but our preamp gain is still optimized. That's what I'm talking about. In a big large console, in a large environment where you're sharing head amps, in other words 2 consoles, there's only one preamp, but front of house might need a little bit more, Monitorland wants a little bit less. You then adjust your trim, and it's only within your workflow. It's not affecting your preamp. So there's the difference between trim and gain. A good question there, Glenn. So understanding all of these aspects makes it so that you have a good experience in what virtual soundcheck can bring to you. I mean, I can use an example. I was working on 2009 on the mic on Coke Fest at Fontaine, and we were down in Cape Town. And Muse, I think it's one of the first times Muse came to the country. They're in a venue profile on stage and front of house. They toured with a complete own tech. The only thing they got from Gearhouse was a 63 amp. Own crew, own stage decks, own backline, own everything. And then obviously the PA spec was completely to there. They were the main act, so the PA was spec to their tech rider. The way that the guy tested the PA was took left, right, stuck it in, pink noise, bursted it out, happy, gave it back. That was his PA check. Obviously speaking a little bit to Yaku David, who was the PA tech at that point. And then I watched him for the evening. He stood with a hand in his pocket and a cigarette in the other hand, and the show ran. LTC, time code. And they'd run virtual sound checks for months in warehouse, on the system, on the PA, and they had everything pre-packaged and pre-planned. And he was there to tweak, but their stage crew, and one of the reasons they traveled with all their own gear, own techs, own mics, own stands, everything, which means they could guarantee almost a replica everywhere they went in the world in terms of how the band was set up, what mic was used. It's the same mic. It's not a 57 and a 57 from another company, because even mics can age. So one 57, another 57 out the box, yes. 4 years difference in age, not necessarily. Dropped 6 times, never dropped. There's a difference. So traveling with the mics are ID'd, they're going on the same spot, same space, so you can guarantee an outcome. And then one of the reasons I love, for example, the Avid console so much, and I've got an Avid profile, which I've been running for 9, close on 10 years. I've been working on profiles since 2007 in the D shows. And then I'm on the Avid S6L now, which is the live console. They were the first one to introduce virtual sound check as part of their workflow within the console. In other words, it wasn't me setting up a DAW system with a console, finding an interface, and then having to once the band goes on lunch, I've got to change the patching on my console, go into here, change the outputs on my session, press play, run it back in, and I'm running a virtual sound check. They integrated it to the point with the Digilink cables on the profile, and these days on AVB, where on the menu, I've got a virtual soundcheck button, which does an amazing job of simulating the bands on stage. So what that does is AVB is built into the console. On the old profile, your Digilinks, which is it's designed by Avid, so it's Pro Tools all the way through. You have a venue link, which connects up the markers, timeline, MTC, which is your MIDI time code, your transport control, all those kind of things. So you can hit record. When you're done, you press play, you press stop, and your channels. All you have to do is switch your system over to virtual soundcheck, which on the old profile system would mean it would look at where this digital snake came in from the stage racks onto the DSP. When you switch to virtual soundcheck, it would disconnect that and connect Pro Tools into that same point, which is pretty much what I said earlier. Once your gain stage is done, you bring your DAW in there, but I don't have to repatch. This is where the niceness comes in now. By clicking virtual soundcheck, it does a global repatch of all inputs coming from the stage rack. It ignores local inputs and it ignores outputs. So my PA still stays working, my monitors stay working, and locally I'm doing playback background music, talkback mics, all that stuff, which I still want working if I'm running a virtual sound check. I still want to run my talkbacks, all that kind of stuff. What they did though, because it's within their system and the algorithm's running on board, I don't lose my head amp gain. So when I go to virtual sound check, I've got a way of selecting whether I'm running input mode, which is pretty much like any other console on the market, or virtual sound check. The difference is if I'm running input mode, it ignores the fact that there might be a preamp. It's just looking at an input coming in, it gives me a trim. If I'm running virtual sound check, it runs a trim, keeping in mind that there in the signal chain there is a preamp that we've just switched away from. If I now in my signal chain go and adjust a trim, which means I'm making the level louder or softer, remember when I switch back to the preamp, I don't have a trim anymore, I've got a gain. So while I've got a virtual sound check, I've got a trim control, which I can go up 2 dB, down 2 dB, and do my sound check as if the band's on stage. I can gain up the bass guitar, I can trim down on snare, I can change some vocal stuff, and I'm working and I'm doing all my little bits and pieces. When I'm done, I go back from virtual sound check, I go back to stage rack, I click apply, then it pops up with a little window that says you have made head amp changes to the following channels. Would you like to apply these to the stage breeze? And you can either say yes or no. Now there's a reason you can say yes or no. If you were just messing around, you can say no and you go back to what you were doing. But if you've changed from a big venue to a small venue, or a mic has changed, or a drummer's is a stand-in drummer, so you're doing some changes, you can say yes, and all those trim adjustments you've made gets applied to the gain structure on the preamps, which means when the band comes back now, the state that I left the console in out of my virtual sound check is 100% matched to what's going to come off stage now. And that's a phenomenal place to be in. The only thing that you've got to think about there is if you're not using a Pro Tools session that was made on that console, obviously it wasn't on those preamps, you're going to have changes. So obviously, again, in situ, make sure that you've done what I said earlier. You've done your capturing stage, you've done your gain structures, and you've marked all that stuff down. The only difference now is you do have play with your gains, but your mic positions are still vital. All those kind of things with the band and your workflow. On the Avid S6L with AVB, it's gone to the point now where it's actually even more integrated, where running AVB, which is a network solution, and the way that the DSP on the new S6L works is no longer HDX cards. Although it's an old AVB network, I can per channel change to Pro Tools. So say for example, I'm running a band, I'm running some sessions out of Pro Tools, which I can trigger off the console of my transport control, which is also running my click track, for example. And then, the bassist has to run to the bathroom because he had a bad sandwich. I go to the bass channel, hit Pro Tools, and I've got a pre-track that's running in the session there, and it takes over. Real time, no latency, no issues there. I've actually tested this to the point where I've taken a drum kit with my overheads and taken the one straight off the preamp and the one off the virtual sound check, and there's no latency between the two. I've doubled up a channel and done the same thing. It's immediate. It's an integrated system that works very well, which also means if I can, while I'm doing my sound check, at any point in time when the band stops, I can just go rewind play without having to switch to anything. And the band actually, I've done this at a couple of gigs now. The band, especially when you're going to do live recordings, the band's are playing. They're having a good time. They take a 10-minute break. I go back a song. They've just killed a song. Rewind, hit play, put it on the PA, what I've been doing while they were on stage. And within 4 bars, the whole band's out front going, wow, this is amazing. This is what we're experiencing. And then it's them playing back, and then I can then isolate different things and do my virtual sound check. But it's all in place where you need to understand if you're doing a one-off show, as long as you get your gain structures and mic positions right. If I'm doing a Friday night and Saturday night show, nothing's going to move, nothing's going to change. It's quite easy. But when you're traveling, mic position, crew understanding what you're doing, even length of cables can start making a difference. Buttons on DIs, all these kind of things. So virtual sound check from that perspective becomes very much a team effort and communicated and planned. what we'll do on Friday, if I've got some pre-recorded sessions, we're gonna look at some rhythm section stuff with the preamps connected, and do everything that I've just said and show you how the interactions work. I'm also going to do it on a Soundcraft console where you don't have that fluidity of interaction, but with MADI cards you can do it very easily by just setting up your console right, and you'll see the preamp and the trim positioning and how that works, and the importance of maintaining a proper gain structure. But at the end of the day, it's actually a very, 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 very valuable tool, and your understanding of it and your whole team, because as a front of house engineer, if you decide I'm going to do virtual sound checks and you don't tell your stage crew, you don't work together with your monitor guy or something like that, and you run a virtual sound check, everybody goes home, you think, hang on, everybody's gone home now, I'm going to stay late, run a virtual sound check, tomorrow morning the guys come back, and someone decides to go and tidy up around the drum kit, so they're tidying up cables and all that, and they end up moving a microphone, or they just sort of, the two overheads weren't the same height, or people do silly things sometimes, or even just go and you did it with tom mics and the third tom mic was a little bit adjusted, so they go and fix it for you. Now, the whole day you ran with it as it was, it didn't bug you on your ear, it sounded fine, you did the virtual sound check, you didn't go, oh, this mic sounds weird. Now they go and fix it. Now your floor tom's messed up because they've moved the mic. So it's just important to understand that it's a process that everybody has to be aware of. I'm not saying you can't move mics. If someone notices something on a mic, the crew just needs to be told, I've noticed X, Y, Z on that mic. Can we fix it? Now, if you notice this after a whole run, that means no one noticed it beforehand, so they didn't take pictures, they didn't make notes. It's very important, make notes, take pictures these days with the cell phones, and just stay aware and stay in the process. So that's virtual sound checks explained. That makes sense. On Digico, on Midas, on Yamaha, on all of these, it's the workflow from a technical perspective is by and far very much the same. They all do things slightly differently in terms of their connections. DAW, Yamaha's got relationship with Steinberg, and so Dante connections, other people, MADI connections, AVB connections with Avid. So there's different methodologies involved, but the concept remains the same, and then some of them do it in a slightly better or more user-friendly way. So like the way Avid does it, with the integration being Avid and Pro Tools, it's seamless, to the point where if I'm running a show with multiple snapshots, while I'm recording my show and I'm changing songs, it's dropping markers in my session. So later on when I come back and I run a virtual sound check, I don't have to be navigating around Pro Tools. I literally just go, I want to do that song. Hit recall on my snapshot. Pro Tools is there already. Hit play. Done. So it depends on what you want to do. For me, when I run The Voice or any other live program that we do, that becomes a vital tool, because often you don't have a lot of time. You've got an hour now to run through a couple of songs. So if I have to still mess around with navigating DAWs and all that kind of stuff, I tend to try and stick to what I'm doing. But if I know that with my Avid system, it's literally a click, done. And then when they go, you're going to go live in 2 minutes, I just go click, okay, I'm still waiting. You're there. Whereas if you're doing patching changes and other navigational stuff, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. So that's my 2 cents on virtual sound check session 1. On Friday, we're probably going to do it at about, I'm just looking on my diary because we did allocated time. I think we said we're going to do it around 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock Friday morning, which there's been quite a few sessions at 10. People are sitting at home doing things. It'll be recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel. While I'm talking about our YouTube channel, we spoke last week about the Shure microphones that we were graciously sponsored by Waldemar. Our first one will be given away on Thursday when we have part 2 with Simon Panos on monitoring. We were going to get very technical on monitoring. And we decided the way we're going to do this, episode 10 was Simon's part 1. So if you want to stand a chance at winning the first Motive mic from Shure, it's easy. Johan's going to put a link in the chat now, and he's going to put a link on our page. You go check out our YouTube channel, subscribe and comment on episode 10 and watch episode 10. And then we will announce the winner during the live broadcast on Thursday night with Simon. So check out our YouTube channel for that one. I had another good question come in that I wanted to answer tonight, which was high-pass filters. High-pass filters is a very useful tool. Again, very contextual based. In a live environment where you've got a live stage running, there are very few elements on stage where a high-pass filter will be noticeable. Drum, bass drum, floor toms, bass guitar, synths, anything that runs low register that actually has low register. There are some vocals which have got bass voices, but if you put a filter in at 80 hertz or 100 hertz, chances are very unlikely that you will hear it in a live environment. Extremely noticeable. So high-pass filters, what does a high-pass filter do? It's not an EQ. A high-pass filter is exactly that. It filters. So if you take water and you filter water to get the chemicals out, it's not just made them less, it's filtered them out if you have a decent filter. So a high-pass filter is exactly that. Instead of having your processing part of your EQ and your dynamics respond to low frequencies, which are not being utilized within your context, you filter them out. On smaller consoles with a button, on larger consoles you've got an adjustable where you can choose frequencies, sometimes really high, like 400, even higher. And then you can really get as clean a sound into your processing chain as possible. So if you've got a female vocal on a stage, lead vocal or backing vocal, the chance of them producing out of their mouth into that microphone anything below, even 160, 180. Now, if the vocalist was talking by themselves in a controlled environment in a studio and you put 160 hertz high-pass filter in, you will hear a difference. Harmonics, body sound, chest sounds, all of those kind of things in a studio environment. But if we're talking within a live environment, like a church stage, concert stage, festival stage, there's so much rumble and ambient noise that resides within that below 100 hertz frequency. It's all your drone on stage, it's everything, the subs, all that kind of stuff. And if you're not filtering your microphones, that goes into your signal chain. So if you've got a vocalist that's really screaming into a microphone, like really belting, the signal to noise is great, because the noise being what you don't want and at low frequency. But if you've got someone that's sitting on a festival stage or a concert stage or a church stage or something, the general thing is there's about 75 to 70% signal to noise ratio, which means you can hear the drums in the background, you can hear the guitar. If you put your headphones on, you don't hear the bass guitar rumble and you don't hear the kick drum low end because your headphones can't reproduce that in that context. But what's happening in the background is the noise is there. So if you've got the opportunity to look at a signal that you record on a spectrograph, for example, you'll notice every kick drum hit on a vocal mic on the low end. Because it's loud and the low end is loud. But the vocalist is a female soprano. They're not singing anywhere near that. So you're filtering out with a high-pass filter to get rid of that noise, which means your compressor, your EQ, it doesn't have to deal with that low end. You've got a cleaner chain to work with. If you're a studio guy, the last thing you want to do is record with filters and stuff in place that you're not anticipating. When you're doing it creatively, go for it. But if you don't know what you're going to be doing with a tone or a sound or a guitar or something in a mix, record it as clean as possible. If I give you the biggest piece of oak wood in the world, you can get as creative as what you want with what you want to make out of it. If I give you a pre-cut piece of wood that's elongated or something like that, or thick on the one side and the other side, you're going to have to get creative in how you can use this productively. If I then tell you, here's a piece of wood, make me a round table that big, I have to add to it. I have to add artifacts to it. I can't get to that size. But if I, so you've got to think of from a creative point of view. So on a live stage specifically, high-pass filters does help you clean up your system. If you're running a set of eons, for example, where you don't have a DSP processing your main out, so you're running eons, powered speakers or turbos or whatever, left, right out of your desk, and you're not filtering everything, two things happen. Your EQ starts becoming a panel beater tool because you're trying to EQ out low end, and the shelves are quite shallow. So if you're EQing out low end, you've got to get a lot into your low mids before you start getting rid of enough bass to make a difference. But now you're compromising on your tone. If you can filter that out so that the low end EQ can be used creatively, you're on a better footing. And if you're sitting with two 15-inch speakers and you're trying to get a defined kick drum sound, if you've ever been in that situation, I've seen guys, they do a sound check, they do kick, snare, hats, bass guitar, everything individually sounds great. The minute you push everything up, the PA folds. Can't handle the energy, can't handle that dynamic. And the more you can help it by getting rid of stuff that's not supposed to be there, the better chance you stand. Obviously, if it's 2 eons and you're trying to cover 5,000 people, that's a different discussion. So just take that in consideration. So high pass filters is something that if you use it correctly, it can be a very effective tool. If I'm running these days with gospel shows, if you listen to the way that gospel backing vocals are produced on stems and stuff, I sometimes run my high pass filters on my female gospel vocals at like 250, 300 hertz, which is very high. I mean, it's obvious. If that vocalist is ever going to sing a solo in that show, I need to note that down because I need to take that off. It'll be very noticeable. But in that processed group of, say, 8, 10, 12 vocals, by me getting that aggressive, I can start honing in on each individual vocal's strengths, blend them, put them through some kind of modulator and try and do some live processing that to really make them stand out as a big chorus. And if I start adding artifacts like stereo images, modulators, chorus effects, all that, and I've got unwanted frequencies, all of those things get chorused out. So the more precise I am, the better. But again, context, because like I said, if you've done all this panning and processing and then a vocalist starts singing, especially in a gospel gig, which they can do, you've got a lot to undo very quickly. So you need to plan for this kind of stuff. Just want to look at it. I've got a question here. Ben's question, no. That's the short answer. Ben's asking, since getting a proper sound check for local artists is a mission in South Africa, would a virtual sound check be a good alternative? No. For the reason that I mentioned, if you don't have time to get a good sound check, chances are you've got about 5% control over the situation. If you're traveling to a festival, definitely no. It's not your mics, it's not your process, you've got no influence on the entire structure. If you're traveling with kit, if I take someone like Prime Circle that travels with everything, all they do is they connect into a PA. So the band on stage is all on ears, so that's pretty much set. So what the guys would use virtual soundcheck for is just tuning out the PA. They don't need the band for that. So for them, yes, it can work. They can run it quickly, listen to it, carry on. The band comes in, play the show, enjoy it. If you don't have control over your signal chain, a virtual soundcheck will shoot you in the foot. I would rather have reference stuff, focus more on what I can control, in other words, PA, tone, and then get on stage, check some mics, and get out front and just do what you do best. And then he's got a second part to his question, or rather, would it be possible to for multiple engineers coming with a Pro Tools file set? No, I'll just answer that. Coming with a session that you recorded somewhere, you can use as reference somewhere, but that's not a virtual soundcheck. That is a reference. Virtual soundcheck pretty much emulates, there was a band on stage, they've gone on lunch, they're coming back. Or I'm traveling with a band, my stage is a photocopy every night of what I've been doing for the last 6 weeks. Which means I know which mic I've got, I know what's there, I know what's there, I know what's there. If I run a virtual sound check, I can make very educated decisions about how I want to manipulate the sound, so when the band comes on stage, I can work with it. If you don't have control over that, if you want to come and mix a band on a different system with a Pro Tools session, there's not much you can use. Your EQs won't be the same. Your gain structure won't be the same. Your dynamics will definitely not be the same. If you're intending to use it so that the band can join you and you'll have a better result, no, it's a shot in the dark. It's like throwing a baseball at a dartboard and expecting a watermelon to appear. Maybe, I don't know. That's Paul Smith is saying, just be aware that some consoles have a filter on the input that could affect sound check. That is true. Very few consoles have that, and when they do have it, it's an option. So if you're looking at a Labo console that he'd be working on, you have the choice. If you look at the studio consoles, the Labo consoles, your very high-end consoles where you can actually build your signal chain from scratch, you have the option to have a filter on your preamp, which means it will be affecting what goes to your DAW. But then you've made that decision, and we just come back to the point that I made earlier, that it needs to be something that you speak about and plan. So it's a valid point. On almost all MI and Pro live consoles, your preamp will always be a standalone. Your high pass filter is always post send off to DAW. And if it's not by default, which it normally is, on the Soundcraft, you can go and pick your direct out point. That's why I was saying on the Avid console, it's not a question of picking it out of your signal chain. It is the way that the signal gets managed in your AVB and goes to your DAW, comes back and emulates the preamp into your workflow. If you're utilizing a console where you need to get to the DAW via a patch of some sort, the way we do it on Soundcraft, for example, we prefer not to use direct outs. So we run recordings and virtual sound checks using the tie lines. On the new VI1000 series, there's 128 tie lines. So if I've got 2 racks on stage, it's a lot of patching. I'll patch MADI port coming in 1 to output 1, and so forth all the way down. So it's looking at the MADI signal before I even get to touch it on the console. It's going to my recording system. And if I've got the preamp on my side, I pick the stage points and I send it via tie line, which bypasses all channel interference. And I don't have a pick-off point or anything in play. It's your cleanest signal possible to your DAW, and we'll speak a bit more about that on Friday. Hope that makes sense. Some good questions that came through tonight. Thank you, guys. I think the comment or the high pass filter was a question that came in the week. I'm trying to remember who asked that. If you're watching, I told you I'm going to answer it. Tell me. Can't remember now. It came through on a direct message. But yeah, so thanks for that. And then join me on Friday morning. We'll do virtual sound checks practical. Aiden, there we go. Aiden asked that question about the high pass filters. Low pass filters, same thing. Low pass filter, obviously, on certain elements, a lot more obvious because HF is something that we perceive naturally in sound. So it's a bit more tricky, but it can work. On my, if I've got a very sensitive system, or I'm in a scenario where I want to control my HF to the system or things like that, if I do control it well, it's the same thing as a high pass and low pass get used the same. If I'm running a synth bass, I can use a low pass filter quite accurately as a creative tool, because some synth bass, when the guys programmed the sound and the high pitched noises are interfering with something else on stage, it's quicker just to put a filter in situation. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll if there's a sound check going, I'll try and get the guy to clean the source up, because obviously you want the source to be correct. But if I don't have that opportunity, I'll play with it. Some guys like putting high pass and low pass filters on everything, because they say, like, well, a vocalist is also not producing 16, 18 kilohertz. No, they're not, but the breath and the mechanical sounds and all that, they actually are. Even on a 58, there's so many technical elements that happen on a microphone that plays a very good sonic role in what people perceive and how we perceive vocals. So you're applying a low pass filter, the minute you hit 18, 17, you're going to start hearing some kind of effect. And if you're doing it to someone that's actually listening to a microphone, like on a monitoring system, you feel it very quickly. There's a question from Mr. Khan. What about dynamic EQing? Would it be better to compress a problem frequency for proximity effect rather than putting a high pass around the 200 hertz? Wouldn't that make more sound natural? Depends on what you're trying to achieve. I'll use a combination of it. If it's a source, I mean, the 200 hertz is already quite high. So if I'm doing something at 200 hertz, I'm doing it completely intentional. It's not because I'm just trying to filter bass out. I'm actually starting to do creative engineering where I'm going to 200 because it gives me a certain outcome. Dynamic EQing, I'll use the most normal place I use dynamic EQing is on lead vocals, where from song to song, the key of the song, some people really have strong points in their vocals or mic technique or anything like that. So dynamic EQ can help you maintain a more natural continuity of sound, and you grab what they do. For example, on a KSM8, if you've got an artist that is naughty on a KSM8 that grabs up the back of the console with their hand and starts blocking the back ports, 1 kilohertz, 1.5 kilohertz really jumps out on that mic, regardless of who's on it. It's just the mechanical aspect. It's got two diaphragms on it, one facing forward, one facing back. If someone's hand slides up too high, you start hearing it. If they start blocking ports, I use, I've used this example before. I don't have a balloon now. If you take a balloon, fill it, put some water in it, take it between your hands and squeeze. You're going to try and predict it, but at some point you're going to squeeze, and somewhere between your fingers, something's going to pop out. That's what happens to a microphone when you grab the capsule. You don't know which frequency node is popping out, but where. So it'll always sound different depending on how you're holding it. So on a KSM8, if I have a dynamic EQ, I'll set it to 1 kilohertz and I'll set a threshold that when someone does that, it starts making that section of the frequency behave because it's jumping out of place, instead of me having to EQing it out, which does make it sound a bit more unnatural. So rather control it so we have a more continuous sound. Very good question. I think, high pass filters is an interesting one. On small systems, it helps you save your PA. On bigger systems, you can use it more creatively. I've had people say, just switch it in on everything, take it off on the bass. Well, that doesn't necessarily work either, depending on the genre that you're in, because there are other elements that are bringing it in. But if it's within your control, use the control. There's a reason high pass filters exist, because it's not part of your EQ, it's separate. The on-off switch is separate to your EQ. Even on a Yamaha, like even the M7s, where the high pass filter, when you look at your expanded EQ, it's in that section. But when you switch the EQ on and off, it's not switching the filter on and off. It's just where they happen to place it. I've always had a problem with where they put it. They put it in the EQ pop-up. It's supposed to be in the preamp or just below the preamp pop-up because it's on your incoming. The fact that it's in the EQ makes some people think it's part of the EQ. It's not, because it's still part of your establishing part of the signal. Once you've established the signal, how you then manipulate it is a different state. And that's how I look at it. I'd rather use my manipulation tools, which is my compressors and my EQs, dynamic EQs, all that, from a creative perspective, after having created the sound. So captured it, filtered it, get in, this is what I need for this purpose. And it's different to every single source. So it's a lot of thinking, it's a lot of work. It's not something you can always do in your pre-production where you just, okay, these are on, these are off. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, if you know the band and you've got an idea of what you were doing, but then you'd have to pay attention. What I would often do if I've got adjustable high-pass filters, I might just switch them on, but I'm not trying to set them. On my Avid SXL, that when I switch them on, they're at 80, which is a very safe low point. So low end is out, and they're low enough that they almost have no impact on my source if I don't need low end. So I just switch them on because it's a bit of finger work, that's time that I've saved, and then when I get to it, I can just grab and adjust. So it's, again, there's no right or wrong way. I think it's about doing things on purpose. If I see you using a dynamic EQ, or I see you using a high pass filter or something in a certain way, what comes to my mind is always why you're doing it. If you can answer that question, there's no wrong answer. literally. If you can tell me why you're doing it, it means you thought about it and you're doing it on purpose, and it's a response that you've chosen. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, the fact that you've chosen to do it, you'll learn more out of that experience and you'll do things differently and make different decisions in future. If you're just doing it because you read it in a magazine or I said so or whatever, you're not learning anything out of the experience. So you need to understand what they do. Whatever console you're on, know what the slope on your high pass filter is. Look at the documentation. If it, like on a Soundcraft 75, but what's the slope? If it's a high slope or low slope. I know, for example, on the new VI series, on a VI1, it's a very shallow slope. So if you put it at 80, and you're on a bass guitar and you put it in out, in out, in out, in out. You have to think about where you're hearing it, because it's such a shallow slope, like a 12 dB slope. I have to get to 110, and then I'm hearing in the effect of a 70 or an 80 high pass filter. That's just the way that they run that algorithm. And so if you know that, you might sometimes look at a session on someone's VI console and you go, yo, he's running his high pass filters high. But you can't judge it on the value if you don't understand how the filter works on that console. You go to a different console and you stick it at 80, you hear 80. I prefer that. What I look at, what I hear, what I perceive needs to all married up and work like that. I hope that answers those two elements that I wanted to talk about tonight, virtual sound checks and high pass filters. Very excited about Thursday night with Simon on our second section. We're going to get right into consoles, tips and tricks, what do's and don'ts, and even things like this filtering and EQing. There's big discussion points about, do I compress vocals or do I not compress it, because obviously they're on ears, they need to hear, they need mic technique, I'm not going to get into it now. We'll speak to Simon. So if you got some questions, prepare those and watch our session. Remember to watch episode 10 on YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Johan's put it in our link already. And then we will announce the winner of the Motif mic on Thursday night from the people that watched episode 10. And if there's no more other questions, it's time for me to greet you guys. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you on Thursday. And don't forget, Friday morning, 10 o'clock, we're going to post that Virtual Sound Checks Part 2 on consoles. Thanks, guys.